worksheet, we are going to start with number 2, which is scaring all of you. Okay? All right, so number 2, you've got 10 equals the square root of m divided by 10. Okay? And so this problem, we're solving these just like we would solve an equation. All right? We're trying to get that m by itself. So to get m by itself, what's the first thing we're going to have to get rid of? The square root. And how do we get rid of the square root? Squaring it. So we will square both sides here. And so 10 squared is 100. And here, the square root and the square cancel each other out, which is what we wanted to happen. So we're just left with m divided by 10. And now we have m divided by 10, which is scaring some of you because it's a fraction, but that's just m divided by 10. How do we undo division? We multiply, right? So we just multiply by 10 on both sides. Over here, that 10 on the top and 10 on the bottom cancel each other out, which is what we wanted. Over here we have 1,000 equals m. That was almost painless, wasn't it? It's not that bad. Not nearly as scary as it looks. All right, now there is one catch with all of these problems, and actually I need to, let me check my answer key here real quick to even see if some of them are, but I think it should. Whenever you have rational equations, you always have to check your answers. And it's, on that first worksheet, I don't think you're going to have many that have this problem, but it does happen, and on the second worksheet you'll see it a lot. Whenever you square both sides of an equation, you run the risk of getting what we call an extraneous solution. Let me give you an example here. For example, let's do a super simple problem. Let's say the square root of x equals negative 7. Okay? So if I do this problem, I would just have to square both sides. Is all I would have to do. Right? And I would get x equals 49. Negative 7 squared is 49. So I've got my answer. However, if I plug that answer back in, the square root of 49, what does square root of 49 equal? 7. Does it equal negative 7? No, it does not. So what I have here is called an extraneous solution. It means that you did everything right solving the problem. You didn't do anything wrong, but the equation, the number just does not work in the original equation. So like for this one, I would have to put no solution, because 49 does not really work in the problem. This is what we call an extraneous solution. All right. Anytime you square both sides of an equation, you run the risk of getting an extraneous solution. It won't happen every time, but it does happen sometimes. So for every single one of these problems, you have to check your answer. Because if you don't, then there's a fairly decent chance that you will be giving an answer that's not actually an answer, because it doesn't actually work. So, like for this one, if we check the square root of 1,000 over 10 equals the square root of 100, which does in fact equal 10. So that is correct. So that is our answer. Back when you started solving equations, your teacher probably made you plug all your answers in to check to see if they were right. And it was probably a pain, and you didn't really like doing it, and it got on your nerves, especially since you felt like you solved it right and you didn't really need to check your answers. And I also feel that same way about these problems, but if you don't check your answers, you're going to lose a lot of points whenever it comes to test or quiz time, because you're going to get answers that aren't really actually the answers. So you actually really do have to do it on these problems, even if you know how to do them really well. You have to check your answers. Okay. So let's do another problem. Let's do number 8. number 8, square root of n plus 9 equals 1. Alright, here you are trying to get that n by itself. So, here what are we going to do first? Square both sides. You got to get rid of that square root before you can move the 9. So, whenever you do that, you're going to have n plus 9 equals 1 squared is just 1. Alright, then what would you do, Hugh? Good, and how do we do that? Minus 9. So, n equals negative 8. Before you circle this answer and decide that it's correct, you do want to check the answer. So, a lot of times you can check this in your head, and it's fine with me if you do. I don't have to see it written down. I'm just writing it down for the purposes of demonstration here. But you would plug in negative 8 plus 9, which would be the square root of 1, which is 1. So, this is the correct answer. Okay, questions? Let's do 12. So for 12, we've got negative 10, the square root of v minus 10 equals negative 60. I'm trying to get that v right there by itself. Now, something key for these problems, you do need to square this to get rid of the square root, but you do not want to do that until you've got rid of everything that's on the outside of the square root. So that negative 10 is what you want to get rid of first. So, Abril, what would we do to get rid of that negative 10? We will not. Although I'm almost glad that you said it, because that is what a lot of people want to do. That 10, is it subtracted from the square root? It's right beside it, so it's multiplied. Right? So what do we do to get rid of something that's multiplied? We're going to divide by negative 10 there. So when you have a number just right up next to the square root, it's multiplied, you must divide to get rid of it. Okay? So now we have the square root of v minus 10 equals 6. David, what would we do next? Okay? We're right here. Square root of v minus 10 equals 6. What would we do next? Trying to get that v by itself. Okay? Square both sides at this point because everything on the outside of the square root is gone. So we've got v minus 10 equals 36. And Brandon, last step. Add 10. And these will be non-calculator. So you can do these without your calculator. All of them. They're not big numbers. Here. Okay? Alright. Questions? Alright, now, we didn't check our answer. We need to check our answer. So if we check negative 10 times the square root of 46. Why is it not working? 46 minus 10 is negative 10 times the square root of 36, which is negative 10 times 6, which is negative 60. So this is correct. So our answer is 46. All right, let's do number 20. So still on that first worksheet, flip over there to number 20. 20, we've got square root of 3n plus 12 equals the square root of n plus 8. Yes. Yes. So we're going to, on this one, we're going to square both sides. Everything's under the square root on both sides, so it just cancels those square roots out. So now we have 3n plus 12 equals n plus 8. So from there, Adam, what would you do next? Okay. Now, actually, on these, this is not a quadratic, so I would subtract the n and move it over here, which gives you 2n plus 12 equals 8. I would not subtract the 8 because it's going to move everything to one side, and you don't necessarily need to do that here. So after you do this, then I would move the numbers. But which one would you move now? Yeah, so subtract that 12. You can do it by moving everything to one side, but what I find kids doing a lot when they do that is they say 3n equals like 4, and they move their equal sign to where it's not supposed to be. So I'm -4. And then Adam, what's the last step on that one? Good. Perfect. Now we do always need to check to make sure that it works. So in this one, you got to do square root of 3 times -2 plus 12, which would be the square root of -6 plus 12, which is the square root of 6. On the other side, you would have the square root of -2 plus 8, which is also the square root of 6. So those work. So this is the answer. Okay, questions so far? All right. Let's do 18. You've got the square root of 2n minus 88 equals the square root of n over 6. Those of you with fraction anxiety disorder might be starting to panic right now. But on most of these, they're not really fractions, so don't panic yet. So, Jaden, what would we do first on this problem? We would square to get rid of the square roots. So that would give us 2n minus 88 equals n over 6. And so now that n over 6, we could think of it as 1/6 n and deal with fractions, or it is n divided by 6. And if I just really don't like having that fraction there, I could multiply both sides by 6. Make sure when you do, you got to distribute that 6 to both of those numbers right there. So that's going to give you 12n minus, I'm not letting you use the calculator. That's going to be 8. Okay. So then after that, you could subtract the n. In fact, I'm going to do it this way. Let's say I subtract the n. That gives me 11n minus 528. But I have to put equals 0. You got to have something on that side. The other thing you could do is subtract the 12n, and then you don't have to worry about that. But you do have negatives. So if we move that 528 over, we got 11n equals 528. And we'll divide by 11, which, some long division here. This is painful. 11 goes into 52 4 times. 44, subtract. This will give us 8. Bring down your 8. So, 48. N equals 48. Always have to check your answers. So 2 times 48 minus 88. Let's see, 48 times 2 is going to be 96. Yeah. So 96 minus 88. That's following a square root. Is going to be square root of 8. No. Yes, 8. And then on the other side, the square root of 48 over 6 is also the square root of 8. So This is the correct answer. Okay, questions? Okay, let's go to the second worksheet, because the second worksheet gets a little bit more difficult. So, number 2. P equals the square root of 2 minus P. So this looks a lot like the other problem. It actually looks less scary than some of those fraction ones. But the difference here is on the other sheet, we would have had like 4 equals square root of 2 minus P. But this time we have a letter equals the square root of 2 minus P. So what you're going to have to do here is you have to square both sides to get rid of the square root. So we're going to do that. But when you do that, you're going to get P squared equals 2 minus P. Okay, questions so far? All right, and that is not nearly as easy of a problem as what we had otherwise, right? This is not an algebra. It is algebra 1 problem, but like late in the semester algebra 1 problem, right? This now is a quadratic because we have a P squared. How do we solve a quadratic? What, Roxana? Everything has to go to one side. I would move it to the left so that the P squared is still positive. So P squared plus P minus 2 equals 0. So on a lot of the problems on the second page, you're going to get a quadratic that you have to solve. From here, you have lots of options for how to solve a quadratic. You could do quadratic formula. You could complete the square. But if it will factor, factoring is the quickest. Will this factor? It will. P plus 2 and P minus 1. Is that right? Keep in mind, those are not your answers. Your answers are P equals negative 2 and P equals 1. Now the second page is where it's going to become really, really, really important for you to check your answers. On the first page, I think there's a couple that have extraneous solutions, but on the second page, lots of them have extraneous solutions, because look what's going to happen here. If I plug in negative 2, I get negative 2 equals the square root of 2 minus negative 2. Alright, so I'm plugging in negative 2 into the original equation. And so that gives me negative 2 equals the square root of 4. And so negative 2 equals positive 2. Is that true? It's not. The negative cannot equal positive. You actually could stop here where you recognize the square root has to equal a negative number. Now, negative numbers can be your answer, but a square root cannot equal a negative number. It just depends on the problem whether or not it can be a negative number. So negative 2 is out. Even though you did everything correctly to get negative 2, it's an extraneous solution. It is not correct. If we plug in 1, though, we'll get 1 equals the square root of 2 minus 1, and that's the square root of 1, which does in fact equal 1. So 1 works. 1 is your only answer for that. Okay, questions? Again, you don't necessarily have to show your work for checking, but you've got to mark out that negative 2 and say it's not an answer for that. If you do it in your head, that's okay with me. Let's skip down to number 8. So 8, we've got the square root of 5v equals v. Okay, for number 8, we've got to get rid of that square root to be able to solve this, so we're going to square both sides. And that will give us 5v equals v squared. Okay, if we have a v squared, this is a quadratic. We need to move everything to one side. Do not divide by that v. You will lose an answer. In this case, yeah, you'll lose an answer that actually works also. So we got to subtract that 5v. We'll get 0 equals v squared minus 5v. How do we solve that? It's only got two letters and two terms. What is it? I heard it. GCF on this one. So when we are missing that last term, we're going to do a greatest common factor. For this one, what is that GCF, Jaden? V. So we'll have v times v minus 5. So v equals 0, and v minus 5 equals 0, so we get v equals 5. Okay, before I circle those as my answers, I'm going to check them. So the square root of 5 times 0 is the square root of 0, which equals 0. So 0 works. That's one of my answers. And the square root of 5 times 5 equals 5. That's the square root of 25, which does in fact equal 5. So that also works. So this one, both of them work. You have two answers. All right, questions so far? All right, let's go to 24. Skip on way on down to 24. For 24, you've got x minus 5 equals the square root of x plus 1. And these are going to be even a little bit more difficult than the last few that we've done. Because here I've got a square root. I've got to get rid of that square root. Alright, so I need to square this side. That means I have to square the other side. But be very careful here. Whenever you have x minus 5 squared, that is not x squared minus 25 or x squared plus 25 there. Here you have to square, double, square. I'm going to write it twice just in case there's some of you that need to do that, but a lot of you use the shortcut there. Square the first, double the middle, square the last. But if you're having trouble with that, x times x is x squared minus 5x minus 5x plus 25. You've got to FOIL that out. First outers, inners, last. Distribute. And so you get x squared minus 10x plus 25. Now, if you use the shortcut, if you square, double square, you skip all that work I just did there and you go straight to this, and that's perfectly fine. I would encourage you to do that. And on the other side, we square the square root, so we get x plus 1. How do I solve this one? What do I do, Brill? Everything to one side. So I'm going to subtract this x and subtract this 1. And that's going to give me x squared minus 11x plus 24 equals 0. Everything on this worksheet is going to factor because they were nice in the answers, or whole numbers. Yeah, I think they're all whole numbers. So how does this factor? X minus 3, x minus 8. So you get x equals 3 and x equals 8 as your answers. I say you get those as your answers, but you have to check your answers here. So if you plug them back in, always plug them back into the original equation, the one that's typed on the sheet there. So if we do 3 minus 5 equals the square root of 3 plus 1, 3 minus 5 is negative 2 equals the square root of 4. Is that true? It is not, because the square root cannot equal a negative number, so x equals 3 is not actually an answer. You also want to check 8. Sometimes both of them are extraneous. Usually it's one or the other, but sometimes they're both extraneous. So 8 minus 5 equals the square root of 8 plus 1. So that's going to give you 3 equals the square root of 9, and that is a true statement, so 8 is your answer. I will say this, if you are doing these worksheets and you keep getting like almost all of your answers are extraneous, you're probably solving them wrong, because you should not get, most of these problems are going to have at least one answer. I think you've got 2 on the second sheet that are no solution out of all 28 of them. So you should not be getting no solution on everything. That probably means you're doing it wrong. All right, I got one more I want us to do. Let's do 28. So for 28, you have the square root of 7a minus 54 minus a equals negative 6. Now for this one, I need to square to get rid of that square root, but I have something on the outside of the square root I need to get rid of first. What do I need to get rid of before I can square both sides? That a. And I can't really get rid of it, but I can move it to the other side. So if I add a over here, I'm going to have the square root of 7a minus 54 equals, and I'm going to write that a minus 6 there. You could do negative 6 plus a if you want, but I think it looks prettier if you do a minus 6. Okay. You must move that first or it would really be a difficult problem. So after this, we can square to get rid of that square root. So over on the right-hand side, we're going to have, left-hand side, we're going to have 7a minus 54. On the right-hand side, we have to square, double, square. You have to write that twice if you need to, but I'm going to use the shortcut this time. A squared is a squared. The middle is negative 6a, and if we double it, we'll get negative 12a. And square the last, so we get plus 36. If you don't like using that shortcut, that's fine. Write it over to the side, a minus 6 times a minus 6, and distribute there. Okay. Aaron, what are we going to do next? Okay, we can add that 54 to the other side. And this is a quadratic. So for quadratics, we need to move everything to one side. So I'd probably go ahead and do the 7a as well. So subtract that 7a. So you have 0 equals a squared minus 19a, 90. Okay. All of these factors. So we'll have a and a, minus 10 and minus 9 here. And so we get a equals 10 and a equals 9. We have to check our answers on these. Go back to the very original problem. So we're going to plug in 10 first. Square root of 7 times 10 minus 54 minus 10. And I need that to equal negative 6. So we're going to get the square root of 70 minus 54 minus 10. And that's going to be square root of 16 minus 10, which is 4 minus 10, which does equal negative 6. So 10 is an answer. And then we need to plug in our 9. 7 times 9 minus 54 minus 9. So we'll have 63 minus 54 minus 9. And 63 minus 54 is square root of 9, which is 3 minus 9, which does give us negative 6 also. So both of these are answers. questions? All right, we've got almost 30 minutes here, so hopefully we can get this done before you go. I want you guys to do on part 1, the first page. I want you guys to do 5 through 5 through 21 odd. And on part 2, I want you guys to do 9 through 27 odd. Okay, so go ahead and get started on those. You do need to check your answers on every single problem. You don't necessarily have to write it down, but you do need to check your answers on every single problem because especially on that second page, you've got several extraneous solutions.